And we exhale all of our stress, our anxieties, our fears, our hatred, all of it. May you be our life, our love, and our breath. In your holy name we pray. Amen. So if according to the community of John, the essence or the fullness of God is love, and if Jesus is the human and divine presence that God sent, teaching us how to live this way of love, giving us a way in which to walk out this love. And as the writer of Genesis points out, if we truly are created in the image of God, then we too are in the image of love. We're our truest essence, right? Before we mess it up a little bit. Our truest essence is love. This is why I love that definition of sin is merely the failure for us to bother to love. Because it's going against our true essence. Right? It's going against who we were created to resemble. Now, I read this quote this week and I fell in love with it. It'll be up here on the screen. You can read along with me. Love is that thing which, if a church has it, it doesn't really need much else. And if it doesn't have it, whatever else it has doesn't really matter very much. Let me read that again. Love is that thing which, if a church has it, it doesn't need very much else. But if it doesn't have it, whatever else it has, it doesn't really matter very much. So if you're loving your neighbor as yourself, then no one needs to agree with your theological system in order to agree with the fact that you're loving. People will see what you're doing is love, even if they very much otherwise disagree with your theological system. This is exactly what John says. John says, people will know who God is because you love. They're looking, right? They're looking to see where this love is at, because when people meet love, they know that something is special. Right? All of us know that. All of us know that when we come in contact with love, when we come in contact with Mike standing up here trying to read, and his son won't let him, we don't feel judgment towards that because we see it as love. And if you don't, love is the way. Love. Right? It sounds super simple. In fact, I've had 3 or 4 emails of people saying, Rustin, you're presenting a theological system that is void of complexity. Well, hold on, because it's going to get a little bit more complex. Love is anything but simple. Love is the way, right? Jesus tells us that the greatest commands is to love God and love your neighbor as you love yourself. And all the other texts in the sacred book hinge upon this idea, right? Jesus simplifies it for us. It's not me. If you don't like it, blame Jesus. He says that everything can be summed up in the idea of loving God, loving neighbor, and loving self. And everything else falls under that. Jesus sifts centuries of religious seeking, religious teaching, and religious practice and reveals that which is most important. Love. Right? It's a simple word. And yet anyone who has ever loved knows that love is also a word that can be extremely complicated, challenging, misunderstood, difficult, intimate, spectacular, passionate, gratifying, mysterious, all of these words. Love God. Love our neighbor as ourselves. Love is the way. Love is the way that Jesus taught. Love is the way that we're to be in this world. Love is the way of being that Jesus was passionate about teaching with all his heart and soul and mind. Love was Jesus' way of being in the world. And yet, people killed him for it. Killed him for trying to teach this way of love. I think in many ways we've domesticated the word love. In fact, Paul felt this way too, because the current milieu around Paul's times of the philosophers was to debate about love in the public square. And they had these different types of love. You've heard of them, like eros and storge and phileo, these words. And Paul would come into those environments and be in conversation with them, and he wanted them to understand a different type of love. So he started talking about this type of love called agape, which is a selfless love. It's a deeper love than what they were used to talking about. And so every time that we read in 1 Corinthians, love is, he's saying agape is, selfless love is. All too often we trivialize the word as if following the way of love is as easy as putting on my new sweater. But as anyone who's ever tended a rose bush can tell you, roses have thorns, and they can be painful. Love isn't some namby-pamby, sweet way of being. It can be, but it's so much more than that. Love takes on many forms. For me, one of love's most demanding forms is justice. Theologian Cornel West says that justice is what love looks like in public. And justice, she can be a demanding taskmaster. Justice demands our best efforts, our sharpest minds, our wisest instincts, coupled with steadfast dedication and selfless service, especially of those who are on the outside. And learning to meet the challenges of love cannot happen in isolation. Love is a community action. Just as our first life lessons about love, I don't know where you learned to love, but I learned to love in my family. Some of us didn't have that loving system, so that may not be the first place that you learned to love. But for me, I learned to love at the hands of my dad and my mom and my sister and my brother and my teachers, my Sunday school teachers and my youth ministers and my family friends. And they taught me how to love my neighbors and to love myself and to love the earth and to love God. This community wrapped around me, right? One of my favorite things in the world is community parenting, right? If you're out here following worship and you're sitting in the courtyard, you'll see community parenting happening every week. You'll see moms whose kids aren't their kids telling those other kids to stop and to be loving, right? Treat each other kindly. Did you hurt someone's feelings? Okay, ask them what they need to feel better, right? They're teaching the way of love. Learning to love requires community. In his book, The Great Spiritual Migration, Brian McLaren writes this: you cannot learn to love people without actually being around people. just won't happen. Including people who infuriate, exacerbate, annoy, offend, frustrate, encroach upon, resist, reject, and hurt you, thus tempting you not to love them. You cannot love and learn the patience that love requires without experiencing the delay and disappointment. You can't learn the kindness that love requires without rendering yourself vulnerable to unkindness. You can't learn the generosity that love requires outside the presence of heartbreaking and unquenchable need. You can't learn the peaceableness of love that requires without being enmeshed in something with unresolved conflict. You can't learn the humility that love requires without moments of acute humiliation. You can't learn the determination that love requires without opposition and frustration. You can't learn the endurance that love requires without the experience of unrelenting seduction to give up. The way of love is a way of annoyance and frustration and disappointment and unkindness and need and conflict and humiliation and oppression and exhaustion. Complex enough for you? No one would choose it if love weren't, in the end, worth it. Love is its own reward. This difficult way, this way of love and suffering, this way of Christ is unavoidably the way of the cross. That's why when I said last week that there are two primary realities that you can take into any country, anywhere in the world, and people will know what you're talking about when you speak of them: love and suffering. Whether we like it or not, they're linked in this weird way. Now, I don't think I'm alone. I think many of us struggle because when we look inside ourselves, sometimes it feels like we don't have the capacity to love. Right? It's not that we're giving up. It's not that we're not trying. We continue to hold hope that somehow, in some way, things are going to be different in the future. Right? Some of you have family that is separated from you, and you're holding hope. And you're dreaming for just a bit more love so that it can make sense, and that all of this stuff, this pain and suffering that you're feeling at the loss of someone you love, that all of it will someday make sense. So maybe we need to change the way we think about love. After millennia of human history, if there was some secret to tapping into love within us, surely we would have found it by now. Right? It certainly isn't the lack of us wanting or trying to generate love between us. But maybe we're looking for love in the wrong place. Maybe, just maybe, we're not the source of love. Maybe it doesn't come from us. Maybe it comes from something or someone who dwells within us. Maybe the Spirit that is also love resides within us and can help us tap into the true source. We need help finding a way to love when we can no longer generate it from within. And faith becomes a conduit for love. This is why Paul connects them. When I can't generate love, I have faith that the Spirit of God that resides within me will show me a way, will generate within me the possibility to love just another step further, to love just a little bit more deeper, even though I want to give up hope, even though I want to walk away. See, this is crucial in being able to love. You know those tense moments? Some of us who've been married know these moments when all you feel is anger and frustration. Those moments in a relationship when things have become so complicated, you no longer know what love looks like. Rather than trying to generate love from within us, perhaps we need to turn to our faith so to open ourselves up to the source of love. To acknowledge just for a moment that I don't have it in me, God. So you got to show up. If my marriage is going to keep working, you've got to show up. If I'm not going to scream at my kid whenever they don't come home when they're supposed to, you got to show up. If I'm not going to judge my kids for how they're raising my grandkids, you better show up. If I'm not going to accuse my neighbor of things that I do in my own space, you better show up. If I'm not going to freak out when the teenager hits my BMW with his car, you better show up. And it happened on Thursday. And I got to be the presence of God's love because I was calm. Because I tapped into something that was other than me. And it's just a car. But that's a boy who's learning how to live in this world, who's learning what to do in moments of conflict, who's learning what to happen when the one thing you didn't think was going to happen that day actually happens. It's then that love can find its way into our relationships. This gives us hope no matter what's going on inside of us, that through our faith in the source of love, the one who is love embodied, we restore our capacity to love. And we restore our capacity to be loved. Now, Paul's counsel doesn't stop at this, right? He places a warning level on love at the end of chapter 13. He says we're still going to be missing something. He warns that we're going to see dimly, right? That we're only going to know in part, that there's more to this love than we can possibly fathom, that love in itself as it is God is mystery, and we're going to walk into it, and every time we walk closer into it, it's like shining a flashlight in a dark place, and it's going to become more and more revelatory to us, but we have to know that even in our best vision, we still don't have it all. We can go more. You think you've reached the end of your love? Keep moving forward. You think you can't love anymore? You think that it's just too broken? Keep moving forward. Keep trying. Now, in my ruminations about love this week, I looked at the cognates for love in the Bible, and I found an interesting connection with the Hebrew word for compassion, which means to suffer alongside. It's a way that we talk about love. And among the obvious meanings, there's this word that calls compassion womb-like. Womb-like. And at first I found this perplexing, and then it dawned on me that to love or have compassion for something and for somebody is to give birth to something. And as more and more love is shared in our world, it nurtures that which is born within us. There is a life-giving quality to love. Love always introduces new beginnings in our lives. Try it. In that relationship where it's broken and all there is conflict, spend just a few days injecting love in ways that would surprise you. At first, they're going to distrust it. And they should, because we haven't been loving. But if you keep injecting love, if you keep moving forward in love, pretty soon it's going to birth something new. Because love always births something new. Because God is generative, creative, and when we love and when we love alongside God, we are birthing new things in this world. We won't always see the results of our love. This is why Paul tells us it's going to be dim and we're only going to know it in part. But once we start that birth, just like your kid, you can't guarantee what they're going to be like as an adult. You do your best, right, parents? And sometimes it's great. And sometimes it's not. But it's not the end. You may think it's the end, but it's not the end. Because once love has started birthing, it just keeps going. So it may not always be evident. Love always nurtures new possibilities within us and between us. So I want to stake a claim today for the future of St. Matthew and acknowledge it also as the past of St. Matthew. In this place, we will make a home for one another. A home where together we can experience communion with the one who is our lover, our beloved, and love itself. And here in this home, we're going to learn from one another how to love and be in the world. So welcome home to St. Matthew, where together we're going to learn how to love our neighbors as we learn to love ourselves. Welcome home to St. Matthew, where together we're going to learn how to love the earth. Welcome home to St. Matthew, where we're going to learn from one another that loving our neighbor and loving ourselves and loving the earth and experience the one who is in love isn't always easy, but if we stick through it, we will birth new things in our neighborhood. For the love that is God lives and breathes in us. Right? The Spirit that God sent and acts is the presence of God that resides, that takes up residence in us and gives us more capacity for love than we can possibly even imagine if we just have faith and believe and act towards that belief. See, in the Greek, belief isn't assenting to the idea of love. In the Greek, belief is choosing to sit down in love and believe that this isn't going to crack underneath me. It's believing in something so deeply that you act toward it even when you're not sure. Creating and being home for one another is what it means to be church. A home where we can learn to love in the world, a home where we can be nurtured and nourished and grounded and sustained for the work of being love in the world, the kind of home where we learn from one another how to be about the work of creating justice, which is what love looks like in the world. So welcome home. Welcome home to the beauty that we find at home. Welcome to the reality of the thorns of love. Creating and maintaining this home where love is our way will at times be painful. We're going to have to work stuff out between us. I'm going to say things you don't like. You're going to say things I don't like. But we're going to figure it out. We're going to do the hard work of love that takes us to the cross together. But there will be grace. And there will be love. And it will be fun. And there will be beauty. And there will be love because you are love. Please pray with me. God, make us your love today. Help us to know that if there's love in this place, then nothing else really matters. And if there's not love in this place, then we don't matter. Because our essence has been lost. So God, give us the strength to tap into you that resides deeply within us and plant the seeds of love in our world.